All right, so I'm here with Trey Morgan, who is a family law attorney. It's me, Mike Kothakota again. And we're going to have, because of the CARES Act, uh, let me read this, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or the CARES Act. We were going to have a conversation about how you can use some of the provisions to help you during this time. In particular, if you're contemplating going through a divorce, or you're getting to, you're having liquidity issues going through divorce. And so Trey and I are just trying to have a conversation about how some of the provisions can help.
Right. And the law is changing very quickly, and lawyers of all types, including family lawyers, we're all playing catch up on what these new laws mean and how they can apply to our situations, and really how we can bring these to bear for the benefit of our clients. And I appreciate you bringing some of this to my attention so that I could read the acts and figure out what it means for my clients, and then hopefully anybody who's watching, what it might mean for them, or if they're attorneys or financial folks, their clients.
Yeah.
I know one of the things that we had talked about was how this act can be used, especially some of these retirement account provisions can be used in divorce, and specifically some ways to maybe free up some liquidity for people who are, divorce is a time when people are typically looking for liquidity and need cash. And you mentioned that there are some ways that this act helps people do that.
Yeah, so the biggest provision for liquidity purposes is the provision that allows you to withdraw from your 401k or IRA penalty free. Now, you still have to pay taxes on them, but you can be under 59 and a half, and you're allowed to take up to $100,000 per year out without paying a 10% penalty. So and that's over 3 years. So you could, over 3 years, take out $300,000 and avoid a 10% penalty. Whether that's in your best interest or not is something that we would have to talk about, but that's the limit. But that could be used for things like debt repayment. If an issue, especially given the crisis, is that there's a lot of debt accumulated from getting divorced, you can now take those withdrawals from multiple places. You don't have to come up with an excuse to pull money out of 401k. Normally, during a divorce, we have to wait for a quadro or a DRO to go through the court, which is going to be really difficult in the current climate.
Yeah, courts are closed for these things, and that's going to make it hard.
Yeah, so this allows a bit of liquidity to kind of maybe reset, so interest isn't accumulating. If you have legal bills that need to be paid, or if you're in the pre-divorce or pre-separation phase where you don't have, there's no funds to move out, you can get money for, a deposit on an apartment, or, even a down payment on a house until, you can settle other things. So it's a little bit of a strategic way to get some much needed money.
Yeah, and that brings to mind, because you are right, a lot of folks in a divorce scenario, they have a financial barrier to actually physically separating. So, they may have significant funds in retirement or in real estate, but they can't get their money out of either one of those things for somebody to buy another house, or for a down payment, or for, like you say, first and last month's rent and security deposits and all that. So what you're saying is that this provision in the CARES Act may help folks in that situation free that cash up short term, but then it sounds like you said they have 3 years to pay that back in. Or what happens if they don't? There's a penalty of some sort, or at that point?
There's no penalty, but you're allowed to put in what you took out without reaching limits, right? So,
Okay.
normally there are limits attached to how much you can put into a 401k. And so this applies to all retirement plans, 401ks. The way to access the funds are a little bit different between the 401k that's at your company and versus your IRA at home. Your IRA at home, you basically just take the money out.
Okay.
Your 401k, you still have to ask the plan administrator. You have to justify that you have a financial hardship or a financial reason to do this, but there are currently no real guidelines for that. And the broader guideline is if you are financially impacted by coronavirus, and if you're getting a divorce, it's likely that you're financially impacted by coronavirus for one reason or another. So the mechanics of getting it out differs. IRAs would be easier. The putting the money back in, it's just that because we have limits on how much can go in per the ERISA laws. This allows you to override that. So you would be able to put what you normally put in, but also you'd be able to put back in, say you sold a house or whatever happened. Maybe you were able to sell some stock at the end of this period and you're able to put money back into the retirement account. This would be a way to do that, to replenish those funds.
Sure. So as an example, I mean, a couple may be able to pull some money out of one of these retirement accounts, use that as a down payment on a home for someone if they're trying to physically separate, or if they're both, let's say that they are both moving out of the marital home, they could pull money out of these retirement accounts, use that as a down payment on each of their new homes, and then replenish through the sale proceeds of the marital home, possibly.
Correct.
And as long as they get it back in within that 3-year period, there's not going to be a negative financial consequence for them.
Right. And it's likely better than trying to refinance, pull out equity to do something like that. Mm-hmm. Because you're then increasing this other cost.
Right.
It's also, my understanding is that currently the refi markets are really kind of tight. So it's really difficult to get a refinance, but new mortgage is a little bit easier. So, it's just another strategy to move things along if you're stuck. I mean, being stuck at home doesn't mean you have to be stuck in your divorce. You can,
right,
or stuck in your marriage or wherever you are. You can actually use some of these provisions to move forward.
Yeah, and so many people, I know that you've experienced it working in divorce cases, but so many people may have assets, but cash flow is such a big problem when people are separating because their monthly expenses are going up. Living from 2 different homes. So anything that helps with liquidity is a big deal for folks a lot of times. One of the other things that we had touched on in our previous conversation was, so many there are a lot of small business owners that are getting hit hard by this, whether you're in a restaurant or some other kind of business that's considered non-essential, that's been forced to shut down or seriously scale back what they're doing. And their families are dependent on that income. And if you're getting separated or divorced and your income dries up, that is just a massive problem for people. But you're pointing out that some of the other provisions of the CARES Act could be a huge benefit for those small business owners.
Yeah, so there are 2 actual ways to access funds. The first one is the more immediate one is the Paycheck Protection Plan, which is probably what a lot of people are hearing about, and that's basically it's a calculation done on your overall payroll. It takes the 12-month average, monthly average of your payroll. So if your annual payroll is 1.2 million, then a simple average would be $100,000. That number is then multiplied by 2.5, which means it's 250,000, and that would be the amount of the loan. And the idea there is that you would still be able to continue to make payroll while you're sheltering in place, while maybe your business is shut down a little bit, so you don't have the revenue to cover those payroll costs. And that payroll costs include payments for medical, payments for retirement plans, anything that taxes, anything that the employer has to pay. And then in addition to that, there are provisions about how it can be used. So typically, it's a payroll loan. You're supposed to use it for payroll, but in some cases, you may have already been able to keep paying people, or maybe you're able to pay them partially. So maybe you don't need the whole loan for that. And so you can use it to pay other things like, your leases.
Yeah, rent was one of them I saw, which is a
So if you
big
have,
deal.
if you've got a big facility, or even a small office, I mean, you can use that to pay your lease expenses. You can use it to pay mortgage and previous loans. The issue there is only this loan is forgivable. So I guess I probably should back up a little bit.
Yeah.
If it's used for any of these purposes, then it's essentially a grant. It's not a loan. So if you got $250,000, that's $250,000 you don't have to pay back if you use it for one of these purposes. You can, and if you don't, then it turns into a loan. Actually, the new guidelines were released yesterday. Then it turns into a loan at 0.5%.
So even if you don't pay it all back within the statute's timeline, it's a 0.5% loan.
That is correct. And there's no personal guarantee. There's no collateral.
I mean, that is a stunning program. I mean, that is a huge program for small business.
Yeah. And so tomorrow's April 3rd. April 3rd opens it up to most businesses. On April 10th, it's opened up to independent contractors and sole proprietorships. So even independent contractors, so gig workers, if you have somebody who is, they're a sole contractor and maybe they just do a bunch of different contracts, they are eligible for this.
And to be clear, I mean, if you are the business owner, you can take out this loan and pay yourself as part of the payroll. I mean, I assume you can be a part of that payroll too, to fund your own, the money that you would have been making in your business that you are now not making.
Yep. So that's correct. So there is a cap on a per person salary. So
right.
If somebody makes more than $100,000, that amount over $100,000 is not included in the calculation.
Okay. Right.
So if you're paying yourself, $150,000 a year, then only $100,000 would be included in that calculation.
Okay. And when you said 2.5 times, is it 2.5 times the monthly payroll?
2.5 times the average monthly payroll.
The average monthly payroll. Okay. So essentially, it sounds like it's designed to get people through the next 2.5 months, hoping that things are going to be back to normal. And I guess they'll pass some. If it's not, they always have the option of passing some new legislation to get us, past that 2.5 month period.
Yeah. Well, and then there are disaster relief loans. So there is actually, let's see if I can pull this up here. Maybe I can't. Where is it? SBA. So there are disaster relief. Oh, here it is, right here. Share my screen. So we just talked about the payroll protection loan. This is a economic disaster loan. So this is completely different. And if you need working capital, they're providing up to $2 million per business, and then also an advance that you can get while your loan is being underwritten. So a lot of people have trouble waiting for a loan. You can get up to $10,000 of an advance on that loan. So this is in addition to the payroll protection loan. So you can which is mostly a grant. In this case, you're getting an actual loan. These are up to 4%. So max that they'll charge you in interest on these loans is 4%. So even if you were thinking about getting a loan prior to this, there's an opportunity to do this. There are a couple of other things, like if you already have a loan with the SBA, you can get a bridge loan. they can actually pay some of the principal and interest if you don't have enough income to pay your current loans. So there are a lot of programs in place to kind of help defray. So if you're a business owner going through, if you're a business owner in general, but if you're a business owner going through divorce and you're going through a hard time, you're trying to figure out how to meet all of your obligations, these are things that should help alleviate some of the anxiety around that.
Sure. I mean, if nothing else, it's helping to pay your kids' care expenses and, pay
Right.
your medical premium. So you and the family have medical insurance during this period of time. And all of those things that are at risk when your company stops making money. And you're, as I understand it, these payroll loans are going to continue to allow you to pay the medical premiums for your employees so they can continue to have, so God forbid some of your employees, come down with COVID or some other ailment, they will still have their medical coverage in place because you've been able to fund that through some of these loans.
Yeah, that's right. And so I don't know if you watch the economic news, so we had 6 million unemployed applications last week.
Mm-hmm.
And so this loan is designed to fix some of that,
Okay.
rehire people that you laid off by April 25th. You're still eligible for this loan. So if you felt like you had to lay people off because you weren't sure and you jumped the gun, now it's an opportunity. If you hire those people back before April 25th, you can include them in your payroll loan and you can continue to pay them.
So that was one of my big questions that I didn't have an answer for yet, is what happens to folks if you've already laid people off? Do you still qualify? But you're saying if you've already laid people off, you can bring back your workforce under this program and still qualify for it.
That's correct.
Those will be some happy employees that get a call and say they've got a job again and they can actually be paid.
Yeah, and get their health, keep their health insurance.
Oh yeah,
all of those things that people are worried about, and all of that's going to help everybody.
Oh right.
So I think it's a great opportunity to. It's not a great opportunity. It's a way to kind of reduce some of the uncertainty that we have.
Well, I mean, I think it's a great opportunity to keep your business open. Right?
Yeah,
and to keep your family and your employees' families afloat.
Yeah, I mean, and if you're negotiating a settlement, this helps with some of that uncertainty too. Because if you're just thinking, I'm not going to have
absolutely
a business, I'm not going to be able to pay child support, I'm not going to pay any of these things. So right,
and knowing, frankly, from a divorce perspective, and if you're talking about how to problem solve these issues. If I'm a business owner, I can say, well, I can take out these loans, but what if I can't put that money back? Or what if I, especially some of that retirement stuff that we talked about earlier, what if I can't put it back? Well, if some of these things turn into very low interest loans, that just makes the downside so much smaller that people don't have to worry quite as much about what's going to happen 3 months from now or 4 months from now or 6 months from now. Because, like you said, this covers 2.5 months, but people still, especially in a divorce scenario, people, we got to look short-term, but people are looking long-term. What does my life look like 6 months or a year or 2 years from now? So those are huge benefits for folks to take advantage of that only help provide more resources when people are getting divorced, when resources tend to become scarce. I know that another thing we talked about was the stimulus check idea and who can get those, and in terms of a divorce scenario, how do they determine, if somebody's getting divorced, how do the stimulus checks, are they still entitled to those? How does that work?
Yeah, so the stimulus checks are, they're supposed to be based on your 2019 returns. There are some provisions, like if you're not eligible to file a tax return, if you weren't eligible to file a tax return, say you're divorced or you're filing, your goal was to file separately, then they can go off of any sort of form like that you filed in the past. So like if you were filing single and you have no income, there's still a way for you to get it. Mm-hmm. All that aside, it's up to about $75,000. It's up to $75,000, not about. So $75,000 for individuals will get $1,200 and it's $150,000. For married couples, will get $2,400.
Okay.
And then for each qualifying child you have, so that's basically any child under the age of 17, you get $500 in addition.
Okay.
Now, it starts to phase out at that $75,000 and $150,000 range. So for each $100 above 75,000 or above 150, the payment amount is reduced by $5.
Okay.
And so, everybody, so railroad retirees, Social Security recipients are available. There are a lot of people who can get these checks, but from a, trying to figure out how to maximize cash flow, one thing would be to look at, it's entirely dependent on, a couple may phase out. Like somebody may make $100,000 and the other person doesn't make anything. Well, maybe it makes sense to file separately in this case, or maybe it makes sense to file separately and one person claim most of the kids. Right. So depending on the situation, there may be a smaller tax obligation. And again, it's going to be specific to the situation, but it's an opportunity to possibly.
Sure. And I'm thinking at those amounts, those amounts are, there's your first month's, last month's rent, and maybe a security deposit for people who are feeling like they're stuck and they can't get out of the same house,
right?
Because if they don't have any cash to do that, these checks would help potentially go a long way towards just letting people get into different homes when otherwise they may not be able to do that. So that would again, it's hard for folks who know that they don't want to live together anymore, but they don't have the ability to live financially separate yet. Any little bit helps them get unstuck. And then I know the last thing that we wanted to touch on that's not really CARES Act related necessarily, but is a product of sort of where we are in the financial world. You had made the point that folks who have the ability, who have some retirement assets saved away, may really benefit from doing Roth conversions now.
Yeah, so currently are allowed to convert a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA, yet without a penalty. You have to pay taxes on the money that's going into a Roth, because the idea is that Roth money is never going to be taxed. So if you're converting from a taxable regular IRA to a Roth IRA, there's going to be some taxes, but you can pay that over 3 years. And the reason it's kind of important to do now, or a reason it can be important, is with depressed asset values, the amount of tax that you have to pay is significantly smaller than it would otherwise be, right? So for example, if you had $20,000 in an IRA and now it's worth 10, well, if you're converting the 10, you're converting the same number of shares, the same amount of property that was in the IRA, but you're converting it at a much lower value. You would pay that taxes on that $10,000, so you pay lower taxes, and then you could spread that tax over a 3-year period. Now, where it can be interesting in a divorce situation is if you're working in a collaborative situation, you can use the opportunity of filing jointly while you're still married to lower that tax bill. And then when you guys split the IRA, or however you're going to do it, there's a little bit more, of a pie when things come back.
Right.
So not to be too concerned with, what the market's doing when things start to turn around. If you're converting at these lower values, you're paying way less tax than you will in the future. So you get this opportunity to have this tax-free account, whether you're getting divorced or not. But I think, if you're cooperative enough, you can make it a much bigger impact.
Right. So what you're saying is, if you are in a relationship where you're in a divorce process where you can really communicate well and plan and strategize together, and you can agree to do a Roth conversion and file your taxes jointly for this year, and then you separate, or then you're divorced later, you're both potentially walking away with now retirement money that's not going to be taxed again, and everyone's retirement picture looks better down the road because you've done the conversion at a time when it was as inexpensive as it's ever going to be to do a Roth conversion.
Right. I mean, other than 2007, this is a pretty depressed market. And so if you've taken a hit, this is another way to buying when things are low is a way to take advantage.
Right.
And converting when things are low are going to be ways to boost your retirement.
It's really a way to sort of grab back some of the value you might have lost in the market long term.
Correct.
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge deal. And I know, certainly in my cases, people's retirement pictures come into play a lot, because when people are getting divorced, obviously one of their big questions is, first of all, is, how do we handle paying everything now? But then pretty quickly it goes to, okay, how does this impact how long I have to work and when I can retire, and what does my life look like in retirement? And every creative solution we can find to improve everyone's retirement trajectory benefits the clients and gives them a little more peace of mind about, does this divorce mean I've got to work until I die, essentially? Or, am I ever going to be able to retire just because I got divorced? So that's a big deal to really improve people's situations if they can cooperate enough to get that done, and then handle their tax situation this year in a way that makes that possible. I think that was it. In reading through the act, I didn't see anything that seemed right away to me to seem to be an obvious benefit or an obvious tool to help people who might be going through a separation or divorce, or who are contemplating a separation or divorce. As we keep going through this, we may find things, and we, maybe have additional conversations. And like you said, so many, the statute has come out, but so many of the details about how it's practically going to work, and how it's going to be administered. One thing that I just wanted to add is, I know my CPA was telling me that if you are looking at the payroll loans or some of these loan programs, your bank should have a lot of that information. They will probably have the application. So if you are a small business owner and you are interested in those, contact your banker and say, hey, is this available for me? How do I apply for this? And walk through it with them. You can also obviously call your CPA or your financial advisor, but any of those people should be able to help you. And then I am trying to get the word out to my clients, if they own small businesses, about these loan packages, if they have retirement assets and they have liquidity needs, that this may come into play. Just because it's so new, and it really does change some of the thinking for folks and the strategies they can use. But we're on the very early edge of this. So figuring out how we're going to roll this and factor these things into our problem solving conversations for them financially is, we're learning how to do it as we go.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I don't think we had anything else, but there's probably going to be, it's a new thing. So ideas start to, you start to figure things out. You go down one path and then you figure out something else.
Right.
I think one other thing that I would tell people is, talk to, if you're not in the legal field, if you're not in the financial field, you have to be aware of some scams. So like, they were immediately after this passed, people, sending out, hey, come get your payroll protection loan, when the reality is the Treasury Department had not even issued guidelines at that point. And just this morning, somebody said that, hey, you need to apply now because the funds are going to dry up like really quickly. I saw this. It was a post on a social media, a business social media site. And I said, how can they possibly do that? Because you're not even allowed to apply until tomorrow. So that makes no sense. You're trying to get
Right.
somebody to apply for something that they don't even have the the opportunity to do that. So that's something I would caution people of. Just be careful, talk to somebody who, at least it doesn't even have to be a financial professional or a lawyer, but who just
Right.
like give you a little bit of a check. Like
Yeah.
maybe make sure that you're doing the right thing.
At the very least, your banker, right?
Right. That worst case, the place you bank is a good place to go.
Mhm.
And the loan provisions are going to be pretty similar regardless. In fact, they're identical for the payroll protection loans. They're going to be the exact same no matter where you go. So you might as well go to your bank or call your banker. Maybe not go to your bank, but call your bank.
Yeah, don't go, just call. Yeah. You may find a locked door on your bank anyway.
That's right.
Well, Mike, I appreciate the time, and I appreciate you bringing these things to my attention, and hopefully by getting the word out, folks will be able to use these things to their maximum advantage and keep businesses open and keep families afloat. And any financial stress you can reduce for families has a positive ripple effect, and whether they're going through a separation and divorce or not. So every little bit helps lower everyone's stress level at a time when everyone's got enough to be stressed about. So I appreciate you being on top of this and bringing it to my attention, and then helping get the word out for folks.
Of course. Yeah, no, I appreciate you taking the time to have the conversation with me. It's a tough time, but I think we'll get through it, and looks like we're doing some of the right things. So.
Yeah, and if they keep coming out with packages and new laws are coming out, we may keep having these conversations until we get it all figured out.